Good Wednesday morning to you. Welcome back to Truth, our tradition. As we continue to examine whether what we believe is what the Scripture teaches or whether we're simply following the traditions of men. Woke up this morning, yesterday was Tuesday. I do my Bible study at B'nai Israel on Tuesday night. So Tuesday's always a long night for me and a long day because I get down here to do this program and then Tuesday night study. Didn't watch any news last night. Didn't get through the Bible study until about 9:30, and the time everybody left. But I woke up this morning to the news that Charlotte, terrible situation in Charlotte, in the Carolinas this morning, is rioting and just total lawlessness going on. And friends, it just further. I see this everywhere I look, and I hope that you're beginning to see it. That the days that the Bible prophesied of the terrible, terrible days of tribulation that will come upon the world are being manifest all around us. We're seeing it in our own country by the race riots and stuff that are going on. We're seeing it with the terrorists and what they're doing all over the world, and just everywhere you look, people are warning that we're headed toward World War III because of Syria and what Russia and the United States and Turkey and Iran and all are doing over there. Everywhere we look, the world seems to be coming apart at the seams. This is exactly what the Messiah said would happen. And we even talked about the earthquakes and the other things that are happening. But everywhere you look, it seems that these are the birth pains that Yeshua warned us about, and they're intensifying as we get to the moment where the Messiah will return. And Yeshua told us that these are like birth pains. And you say, well, we've always had earthquakes and famines and pestilence and wars and rumors of war. Yeah, we've been in the last days for the last 2,000 years. The last days, forget about thinking they're going to start at some point in the future and we're going to have 7 years of tribulation. The book of Revelation is a book of metaphors and symbolism, and you're not to take it to be 7 years literally. Just like the 7 churches of Revelation, not all the churches there were. 7 is God's number of completion. And what he's showing is that we started the period of tribulation, the beast system that is controlling, 2,000 years ago. It's not going to start at some point in the future. What we're seeing right now is these things beginning to come to a culmination. We've always had some of these things, but Yeshua said that it was like a woman in travail or getting ready to give birth. And you've all heard the analogy that when a woman, as I'm told, I've never given birth, obviously. But I'm not going down that road. But they tell me that when a woman gets ready to give birth, at first there are the birth pains or the contractions that are most of the time pretty light and spread out far apart, but that the closer those contractions come in time, and the harder they come, they say, you get ready. You better get to the hospital. She's fixing to give birth. And this is what the Messiah told us about the things that we're experiencing around us today, is that we need to get ready. He's coming. And I'm not going to go down this road today either, but if you're looking for a pre-tribulation rapture of the church to take you out of here and all this, friends, you need to wake up. If there was going to be a pre-tribulation rapture of the church, of the ecclesia, the body of the Messiah, you wouldn't know it. If you're worshiping on Sunday and eating swine's flesh and not following our Father's calendar, if there was a pre-tribulation rapture of the church, you would not go, my friend. You would never know it. In fact, I dare say Shreveport and Bossier wouldn't even know anything had happened if there had been a pre-tribulation rapture of the church and God taking out his saints. You wouldn't know it. So anyway, these are the things that's happening around us, and so I'm going to continue to share with you and try to get you to wake up and begin to think a little bit for yourself rather than just listening to the traditions of men. And the Apostle Paul did the same thing in pleading with us to understand that we had to change our way of thinking. And I guess that's really what I'm asking you to do, is to truly change nearly everything that you think. Everything that you've thought about the world and the way you've viewed the world and the way you've viewed the church and the way you view God and the way you view his son Yeshua. Yes, I'm asking you to change that. Paul did the same thing in Romans chapter 12, verse 1. And to set that up a little bit, if you go back and read chapter 11, you know that the Apostle Paul is talking to the Gentiles who have come into the ecclesia and talking to them and wanting them to not fail to understand that God had set aside Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. Now, the fullness of the Gentiles is the 10 tribes of Israel that have been scattered. Christ came to gather the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And Judah, as Israel is used in Romans 11, is referring to Judah. They have been set aside. And Paul is warning you that those natural branches were broken off. And we were grafted in contrary to nature. That is, we who were formerly Gentiles were grafted in contrary to nature. You don't graft a wild fruit tree into a good fruit tree. But he said, God did that with us. And so he said, don't boast yourself against the root. You don't support the root's you. And so in chapter 11, he's been making that argument that all Israel would be saved. Because this is God's covenant with them when he will take away their sin. And I'd love to go into that. It's a wonderful teaching. But you have to understand, all Israel will be saved. As concerning the gospel, Paul said, they are enemies for your sake. That is, you who were formerly Gentiles. But as concerning election, they are beloved of the Father's sake. For the gifts and calling of God are without repentance. That is, God does not change his mind about dietary laws, about the Sabbath, or anything else. God doesn't change his mind. We see that over and over again in the Scripture. But this is why I'm telling you that you and I have got to change our way of thinking, because we've been told by preachers, tradition of men all these years, that God changed his mind, that God changed his plan, that God started plan B when plan A didn't work. And I am telling you, that is tradition of men. It's a doctrine of seducing spirits and demons. So in Romans 12:1, I want you to look at this. Paul said, I beseech you, therefore, brethren. Now, what he's saying, therefore. Therefore, go back and read 9, 10, and 11, those 3 chapters that come before, where he's talking about Israel's present rejection and their future restoration. And he says, I beseech you, that is, you formerly, you who were Gentiles, you who are grafted in. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Now, Paul called them brethren here. We've already seen that Yeshua in Luke 8 and other passages where the disciples told him that his mother and his brother were out calling for him, he said, who is my mother and my brother? Those who hear the word of God and do it, the same is my mother and my brother and my sister. So Paul calling these people brethren. These are people that have come into the covenant. They realize that they have been grafted into Israel, and they are now heirs to the promise and to the covenants, as he explained to them in the book of Colossians, if you read that. But so he's saying that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy. The word holy is sanctified, set apart, acceptable unto God, which is the reasonable thing for you to do. Verse 2 of chapter 12, he says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Paul is talking to people like you and I who were formerly Gentiles. You've accepted Messiah. Hopefully you have saving faith, and that you have crossed over and entered into the covenant with the Father, and now you are a part of Israel. He says, be not conformed to this world. Now, why would Paul have to tell these people to not be conformed to this world? The word conform there is it means to fashion alike, to conform to the same pattern, adjoining yourself to. Because Rome ruled the world at this time. Rome had their gods. They had many gods, and then they would have primary gods, but they had their calendar, they had their feast days, they had all the things that Rome did. And Rome was the one that ruled the world, and these Gentiles had come out of that system. They had their pagan gods of Jupiter and Diana and Aphrodite and all the different gods. Mithra, the invincible sun god, where we get our Sunday worship from. And so Paul is saying, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. That is, the word that's used there in the Greek is metamorpho. It's where we get our word metamorphosis from. That is to change. You've seen, I think that's what they say a butterfly does, or a cocoon. It does it metamorphosis, and it changes from cocoon into a butterfly. And so Paul is telling these Gentiles, you've really got to change everything you think, because you're coming out of paganism and out of the Roman system, Gentile worship and way of thinking, and you've come into Israel now, and you have literally got to change everything you think. You have got to transform, metamorphose into doing what God would have you to do. The renewing of your mind. It really simply means a renovation. Like you'd go in and renovate your house. You just totally redo it. You tear out everything that's old, and you put new walls up, maybe new plaster, new ceilings, and new floors, new paint. You totally renew it. And this is what Paul is saying. When Gentiles come into Messiah, it was to totally change your entire way of thinking. And this is what the Christian church has got to wake up and understand. You cannot accept the Messiah, whether you say you ask him into your heart or whatever term you want to use. You cannot do that without a total change from the world. You don't accept Jesus into your heart and just continue to do the ways of the world. And this is what Paul is telling these Gentiles here. And I know what I'm asking you to do is to change Sunday worship and to change the way you eat and the dietary laws and start observing our Father's calendar. And I know you say, my God, Steve, you're going to change. You're going to change my whole world. Yes, that's what I seek to do. I seek to change your whole world, that you may not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing, changing, renovation of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of Yahweh, God. Now, what is the will of God? The will of God is His Torah. It's that we follow His instructions. I've been preaching and hammering this to you, that if we don't keep His commandments, we don't know Him. If we love Him, we will keep His commandments. That is the will of God. When Yeshua gave us the model prayer, and He said, don't use vain repetitions as the heathen do, but when you pray after this manner, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I want to tell you, if you could transport yourself to heaven today, you would find there's no lawlessness up there. There's nobody up there doing their own thing, eating swine's flesh and worshiping on the pagan Sunday and celebrating Easter. You won't find any of that stuff up there, because God's will is that His Torah and His instructions be carried out. And Messiah is saying that your desire and my desire is those who are in Messiah walking after Him. Our desire ought to be that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that's what Messiah is coming to do, by the way, in the millennial reign. And those of you that are not beginning to transform, change your mind, your way of thinking right now, you're not going to know what to do when the Messiah gets here. That's why the Father gave us these rehearsals, the 7 Moedim, or appointments, that you'll have some idea of what you're supposed to do. It's like going to a wedding rehearsal. Why do they have rehearsal dinners? Is that everybody goes and you walk through the process so you know what you're supposed to do, if you're the ring bearer, when you're supposed to go in, how you're to carry the ring, if you're the best man or you're a bridesmaid. Everybody goes so that they know what their position is. That's why we have these rehearsals. And what God gave us, and by the way, we're coming up on a fall feast. October the 2nd will be Yom Teruah, or the Feast of Trumpets, and then 10 days later will be Yom Kippur, and then following that 5 days later will be the 8-day Feast of Tabernacles. And these are all rehearsals for what God is going to do, the last 3 when the Messiah returns. And I believe that He's coming very soon. But if you're not involved in this, you're not going to know what to do. You got to get your garments ready now. You got to be ready. But so Paul is telling them that when you come to Messiah, you've really, really got to change everything about the way you think. And so for the Christian church, and what I'm trying to get them to see today, and I'm saying I love Christians. I just don't like Christianity. I don't like the false doctrine because it's filled with doctrines of demons and seducing spirits that's contrary, that denies the Messiah, that denies the Father, and all of the apostles and the prophets. And so, yes, I hate the doctrine of Christianity, but I love Christians of all denominations because I know that they're just like me. We swallowed the Kool-Aid that we'd been given. We fought or accepted the false doctrine of men that was taught to us, and many of those good, sincere men, but they had been deceived themselves. And so here we find ourselves forsaking the Sabbath, which, as I've said over and over again, is the one sign that the Father gave us that we were in a covenant relationship with Him, is the Sabbath. And here the church is worshiping on Sunday. And Sunday is named for the sun god Baal. The Father gave us the Sabbath. But we say, well, we're Christians, and now the church, we're going to worship on Sunday. Where do you think the church got that? Now, they'll go and they'll talk about the resurrection, and they will say, well, Christ rose on Sunday. Well, first of all, what I want you to understand, and back to what Paul is saying here, be not conformed to this world. Do you know that Rome had a calendar, and on their calendar, they had the days of the week as we have them today. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. That was on the Julian calendar that Julius Caesar had established. It was a revision of the Roman calendar in 46 BC. Some depending on what date you give as the birth of Christ, 4 BC or whatever, but some 41 years at least before the birth of Messiah, Julius Caesar had revised the Roman calendar, and it was called the Julian calendar. That's what the world went under at that time. And it had the same days of the week, had the months of the year. Now, some of the names changed a little bit, but these Gentiles were coming out of the world system where they'd been following the Roman calendar. They knew the days of the week as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and Sunday. They knew the months of the year, the 12 months, as we have them today. Not one time do you ever find the Apostle Paul, who wrote half of the New Testament, or Peter, James, John, any of these others, ever referring to that pagan calendar. Friends, that ought to be a wake-up call to you. I want you to ponder that for just a minute. Not one time in all of the writings of the apostolic writings, of the Brit Hadashah, as we call it, not one time do you ever hear them refer to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. Not once. You never hear them refer to the Roman months of the year. You don't hear January, February, March, April, May, June. Now, July and August were changed later by Julius Caesar to 1 July to be named after him, and August to be named after Augustus Caesar. But not one time do you ever find the writers of this book that we say we follow and it's our guide for faith and practice and what we do, not one time do you ever find they refer to that Roman calendar. Now I want you to think with me for a minute. Do you not find that significant? That these people who knew that they were to be sanctified, set apart, not part of the world, not one time did they ever acknowledge the Roman calendar. And Rome ruled the world. And I'm submitting to you it's because they were sanctified. They didn't care what the world did. They were going to follow our Father's calendar, and they were going to keep His feast days. And obviously, we've already seen that at least 84 times we can document that the Apostle Paul, who we say changed the law or tells us the law was done away with, at least 84 times the Apostle Paul observed Shabbat and taught in the synagogues on the Sabbath. So how in the world do we get to this first day of the week stuff? Do you know that the term first of the week, first day of the week, only appears twice from the book of Acts on. Twice. Look them up, count them for yourself. Twice. And it never says the first day of the week. If you'll take your King James Bible and look at it, you'll notice that every time, you'll find it in Acts 20, verse 7 through 16, and 1 Corinthians 16, 1 through 8. You'll find that day is always italicized, which means that the word day was not in the original manuscript. It just says that the first of the week, not first day of the week. And one of the passages that the church uses to say that the day of worship was changed to Sunday was saying that the early church met on the first day of the week, and so that's what we ought to do ourselves to be patterned after the early church. But what I'm going to tell you is there's not one indication that says that the early church met on the first day of the week. It's just not there. If you'll look in Acts chapter 20, beginning at verse 7, Paul says, or Luke writing, says, and upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, and Paul preached to them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. And there were many lights in the upper chamber where they were gathered together. And there sat in the window a certain young man named Eutychus, being fallen into a deep sleep. And as Paul was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep and fell down from the third loft and was taken up dead. And Paul went down and fell on him and embracing, said, trouble not yourselves, for his life is in him. And when he therefore was come up again, he had broken bread and eaten and talked a long while, even till the break of day. So he departed. Now, what I want you to see here, the church used this, said, well, the disciples came together on the first day of the week to break bread. First thing I want you to understand is that it does not say day. Day there is italicized. It says upon the first of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. What is significant about this? They observed Shabbat on Saturday, the seventh day. It was a day of rest. They went to the synagogues or to the temple, and they studied Torah and observed Shabbat. Now, when they were in the synagogues during these times, you would find that there's all kind of people in the synagogue. There are different sects of Jews. There's the Sadducees. There's the Pharisees. There would be, I'm told there are hundreds of different sects, but primarily we know about the Essenes and the Sadducees and the Pharisees and these. But a lot of different people of Israel there with as different sects of Jews, but they're all coming together and worshiping in the synagogue and observing Shabbat as the Father had commanded them to do. And that included the believers in Messiah, those who had accepted Messiah. And so what they've done at the end of the Sabbath, those who believe in Messiah would get together in their little group. Little groups probably go off as the Sadducees would have their little group over here and the Pharisees over there and do whatever they did. But we have here that at the end of the Sabbath, as it begins to draw toward the first of the week, which is sundown. It's not Sunday morning. The first of the week begins at sundown as the Sabbath ends. So when they concluded the Sabbath services in the synagogue, those who believe in Messiah would get together in their group and break bread. And it says that Paul, planning to depart the next morning, the next day, continued his speech until midnight. So when you understand that he started speaking and teaching them after the sun went down, because the Sabbath was over, and those that followed Messiah got to get together and break bread, and he's teaching them. It's not that they're meeting and having church at First Baptist Church on Sunday morning. That's the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. But he was teaching them and still instructing them about their walk in Messiah. But it was after they had concluded the Sabbath And he continued his speech unto midnight. Not one indication here that they had left observing Shabbat and the synagogue service. Now, the other place that we'll find that there's a reference is Paul says upon the let everyone lay by in store upon the first day of the week. Now, when Paul said to let everybody lay by in store, I want you to go back and find that passage and look at it. He didn't say on the first of the week, when the collection plate passes in front of you, everybody put some money in it so there'll be no gathering when I come. That's not what the Apostle Paul said. He said to upon the first of the week, and again, the word day there is italicized. So he said upon the first of the week, let everyone lay by in store. And he was going to take gathering for the relief of the saints in Jerusalem so that there wouldn't be any gathering when he come. But he's not saying that they were gathering together on the first day of the week at First Baptist Church Corinth and or First Independent Church or First Methodist or put any kind of denomination you want to on it. That's not what Paul was saying. But he said upon the first of the week, let each one lay by in store. He didn't say put it in an offering plate. He didn't say give it to the church. He didn't say give it to the pastor. He said, let everyone put in reserve. And if you take that word store there, in the Greek, that's exactly what it means, to set it aside, in reserve. And why would they do it the first of the week? Because God wanted the first fruits. They don't set it aside on the Sabbath. They don't handle money on the Sabbath. They don't do business on the Sabbath. So it was a very common thing for them to do as at the first of the week. After the Sabbath is over, they take the first fruits of their toil and they make contribution to the Father out of that. You have to understand, in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, Daniel warned us that there would be four kingdoms that would come, and that the fourth kingdom would be worse than all the others, and then in Daniel 7:25, that king would seek to change the times and the laws. That is the Roman system. And it did. And he said for times and a half time. If you go back and look at the word times there in Daniel, you'll find that the word for time and times, which is plural, is exactly the same word. It means a day. And a half times is a half a day. Well, Peter tells us in Peter chapter 2, verse 3 through 8, that do not be ignorant of the mystery that a day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. So when Daniel talked about this fourth system that would last for times and a half time, he's talking about this system would last for 2,500 years. Do you know when Rome was established? The Roman Empire came into being about 500 BC. We're now about 2,000 into the Common Era. That means that the Roman system has lasted right now about 2,500 years, and it has deceived the whole world. The Rome has changed the calendar, changed the times, changed the calendar, and sought to change the laws. And that's the system we're in. We've been in it for nearly 2,000 years, and it is time now that the Messiah is going to return and wrap it all up. Friends, we have to be renewing our mind. Be not conformed to this world. And that's why I'm asking Christians, pastors, and all from all denominations to come out of the Babylonian system before you are judged by her plagues and receive her plagues. It's time for the church to wake up, come out of Babylon. See you tomorrow. Shalom Aleichem.